When you picture Colorado, you probably imagine towering peaks, alpine lakes, ski slopes carving through pine forests, maybe a charming mountain town with string lights and craft breweries. But here's the thing, almost nobody lives there. Nearly 90% of Coloradans live east of the mountains, but not on the eastern plains. The eastern third of the state, flat, treeless, more Kansas than Colorado, has fewer people per square mile than parts of Mongolia. Cheyenne County stretches across 1,781 square miles and holds just 1,748 people. Roughly one human for every square mile in one of America's fastest growing states. And it used to have 10 times more. 3 times people flooded onto these plains. 3 times the land found a way to push them back out. In the late 1800s, the federal government made a bet on the eastern Colorado plains, and for a while, it looked like the House was going to lose. Through the Homestead Act and its later enlargements, Washington actively encouraged settlers to move onto semi-arid shortgrass prairie that receives just 14 to 18 inches of rain per year. For context, most crops need at least 20, but the settlers who arrived did not know that because they showed up during an unusually wet period. The rain made the prairie look generous. Families loaded wagons with everything they owned and staked claims on land that had never felt a plow. They cut sod from the prairie itself and stacked it into walls because there were no trees to build with, not for miles in any direction. These sod houses leaked when it rained, sagged under their own weight, and sheltered snakes and insects in the walls. But the settlers stayed because the wheat grew, and wheat meant money, and money meant the gamble was paying off. Railroad companies printed promotional posters showing golden fields stretching to the horizon, promising that rain followed the plow, that the very act of farming would somehow change the climate. It was pseudoscience dressed up as destiny, and thousands of families believed it because the weather cooperated just long enough to make the lie convincing. Boosters in eastern newspapers described a garden waiting to be unlocked. Towns appeared across the plains. General stores opened. Schools went up. County courthouses were built from quarried stone, designed to last centuries, monuments to a permanence that the land had never promised. Populations climbed year after year, and the optimism felt earned. By the early 1900s, entire counties that had been empty grassland a generation earlier now had churches, post offices, and main streets bustling with commerce. The government had turned empty prairie into a civilization. An entire world sprouted on a promise the climate never intended to keep. When the drought returned in the 1910s and accelerated through the 1930s, the exposed, plowed soil had no root system left to hold it. The native grass, short, tough, evolved over millennia to grip the plains through dry spells, was gone. Millions of acres of it, ripped out and replaced with wheat stubble that crumbled to powder the moment the moisture disappeared. The wind did the rest. Southeastern Colorado, Baca County, Prowers, Kiowa became ground zero for the American Dust Bowl. Storms rolled across the plains like black walls, blotting out the sun at midday and turning afternoon into something darker than midnight. Dust piled into drifts against farmhouses like snow, sifting through window frames and under doors, coating dishes left on tables and filling lungs with grit that no amount of coughing could clear. Children walked to school with wet rags pressed over their mouths. Cattle suffocated in the fields, their nostrils clogged with dirt. Grasshoppers descended in clouds so thick they darkened whatever sky the dust had left, stripping crops to bare stalks in hours. Families who had invested everything, their savings, their labor, their youth, watched the topsoil they had plowed lift off the ground and sail east toward Kansas. The very act that was supposed to unlock the land's potential had destroyed its only defense. By 1937, Colorado's farm population had fallen below where it stood in 1920. Nearly 2 decades of growth erased in a handful of brutal years. Baca County peaked at 10,570 residents in 1930. By the 1980s, half were gone. Entire towns dissolved. The stone courthouses outlasted the communities that built them. The first cycle was complete. The rain lied, the soil blew away, and the people followed. But the story did not end there. Because the New Deal did not just rescue these farmers. Federal programs planted shelter belts of trees, taught contour plowing, and paid farmers to let damaged land rest. It stabilized the soil just enough to set up the conditions for a second, slower trap. If you want to understand how geography decides where Americans can and cannot live, subscribe. After World War II, a new technology arrived on the plains: deep well pumps and center pivot sprinklers that could tap the Ogallala Aquifer. Beneath the surface of eastern Colorado, stretching along the state's entire eastern border, lay a vast underground reservoir of fossil water. The Ogallala covers roughly 14% of Colorado's land area, part of a 174,000 square mile system, running beneath 8 states from South Dakota to Texas. It is one of the largest groundwater deposits on Earth, water that accumulated over millions of years, filtered grain by grain through sand and gravel, pooling in porous rock formations hundreds of feet below the surface. Suddenly, circles of green appeared across the brown prairie, visible from space. Perfect geometric discs stamped onto the dust like patterns from another world. Each circle marked the reach of a center pivot sprinkler, a quarter-mile arm rotating slowly around a fixed well, turning dead-looking ground into productive cropland. Towns that had been dying stabilized. Farms that had been marginal became profitable. The aquifer did what the rain could not. It delivered water on demand, regardless of the sky. The contrast is stark even within a single county. Walsh, in Baca County, sits over the Ogallala. It has banks, businesses, a functioning school, the quiet hum of a town with a future. Pritchett, just miles away in the same county, same sky, same wind, same soil, has 137 residents and a cafe that is closed more years than it is open. 2 towns separated by a few miles of flat ground and 200 feet of underground geology. One sits on water, the other does not. And that single difference decides everything about who stays and who disappears. Drive between the two and you cross an invisible line as decisive as any river or mountain range, except this boundary lies underground and no map you will find in a gas station shows it. The Ogallala created a second civilization on the plains. But this time, the resource was not rain that could return with a wet cycle. It was water that took millions of years to accumulate, fossil water, ancient and finite, and it is being pumped out in decades. Here's the cruel twist that nobody talks about. The same decades that brought irrigation also brought mechanization and farm consolidation. Tractors replaced teams of horses and the men who drove them. Combines replaced harvest crews that once numbered in the dozens. One farmer sitting in an air-conditioned cab with GPS guidance could now work land that once supported an entire community of homesteading families. Where 20 families once farmed 20 quarter sections, one operation now runs the whole spread with a handful of seasonal employees. The math is simple and devastating. When you need fewer hands to work more acres, the hands leave. The technology that kept the farms alive made the farmers unnecessary. The crops stayed. The yields even improved. Bushels per acre climbed steadily through the second half of the 20th century as seed science, fertilizers, and precision agriculture squeezed more production from every irrigated circle. But the towns emptied because productive land and populated land are not the same thing. A thriving farm no longer needs a thriving town around it. The farmer drives to the county seat for supplies or orders parts online. The grain elevator still runs, but the barbershop, the hardware store, the diner, all the businesses that depended on dozens of farm families spending money on Main Street, lost their customers one by one. Many eastern Colorado counties hit peak population around 1920 to 1930 and have been bleeding residents ever since. Not because farming failed, but because farming succeeded without needing people. The economy grew. The population shrank. That paradox is the engine driving everything that followed. You can stand on a county road in Kit Carson County today and look out across thousands of acres of healthy, profitable wheat and not see a single human being in any direction. The fields do not need them anymore. Drive past any large operation on the eastern plains and you will see the evidence. An abandoned farmhouse standing in the middle of an active, healthy field. The crops grow right up to the porch steps. the roof sags, the windows are dark, but the weed around it is golden and tall, indifferent to the empty house at its center. The land is working. The people are gone. Today, the decay is visible but quiet. Walk through an Eastern Plains town and the loudest sound you hear might be a freight train passing through without stopping. Abandoned storefronts line main streets where paint peels in long strips and sun-bleached open signs hang behind locked doors. Collapsing houses lean at angles that suggest they have been giving up for years. Dirt roads carry no traffic. The towns are not ruined, they are simply fading, losing detail like a photograph left in the sun. In Cheyenne Wells, the old 3-story school, built of brick and ambition for a generation that expected the town to grow, has been replaced by a single-story building that already feels oversized for the remaining students. Hallways echo where they should hum. In tiny Kit Carson, a newly opened daycare struggles to fill its infant room. Not because there is no demand for childcare, but because there simply are not enough babies. The town has crossed a threshold so far into decline that its youngest generation cannot fill a single room. Young adults leave for the Front Range or out of state, for college, for careers, for a future that the plains cannot offer. They leave at 18 and almost never come back. The population skews older every decade, and the services that remain are stretched thinner each year. Fewer people mean less tax revenue, which means crumbling infrastructure and closed services, which means more people leave. The spiral feeds itself with mechanical precision. Schools consolidate with the next town over. Then the grocery store closes. Then the church locks its doors. Then the only doctor within 50 miles retires and nobody replaces him. The nearest hospital might be an hour's drive, and in a medical emergency on roads with no cell service, that distance can be the difference between life and death. Some of these counties are classified as frontier, 6 or fewer people per square mile, a designation more commonly associated with the 19th century than the 21st. But the story is not finished. It is about to enter its third cycle. The Ogallala Aquifer is being pumped faster than it can recharge, in many places, far faster. In parts of southeastern Colorado, well levels are declining measurably, dropping year after year, sometimes foot by foot. Farmers who once punched wells down 200 feet now drill to 300 and find less water when they get there. Some are cutting back on water-hungry crops like corn, switching to dryland wheat or grazing land, or watching their wells sputter and go dry entirely. When a well fails, it does not come back. The farmer either drills deeper at enormous cost or sells the equipment at auction and walks away from land his family has worked for generations. State regulators and the Colorado Groundwater Commission are caught in an impossible position, protecting near-term farm incomes while trying to preserve an aquifer that, once depleted, is gone for geological timescales. The recharge rate is measured in fractions of an inch per year. The pumping rate is measured in feet. The math does not work, and everyone involved knows it. The water filling those underground pores fell as rain during the last ice age. It is not coming back on any timeline that matters to a human being. The pattern is now unmistakable. The rain looked permanent. It was not. The soil looked resilient. It blew away. The aquifer looked infinite. It is draining. 3 resources, 3 betrayals. Each one solved the last crisis just long enough for people to build their lives around it before it failed. Meanwhile, 88% of Colorado's population lives along the Front Range corridor, from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs. Universities, hospitals, airports, military installations, tech companies, every institution a modern economy needs, concentrated in a single band along the base of the mountains. Denver International Airport alone handles over 60 million passengers a year. The University of Colorado and Colorado State feed talent straight into an economy that has no equivalent on the plains. The corridor has critical mass, and critical mass has its own gravity. Once enough people, money, and infrastructure cluster in one place, everything nearby falls toward it. The pull gets stronger with every addition, and there is no force on the eastern plains strong enough to resist it. A young person growing up in Kit Carson or Cheyenne Wells who wants to become a doctor has to leave. There is no medical school on the plains. An aspiring engineer has to leave. The firms are in Denver. A kid who dreams of working in tech has to leave because the startups, the accelerators, the venture capital all cluster along the Front Range. They go to college there. They find jobs there. They meet someone, buy a house, raise children, all within that narrow glowing corridor at the base of the mountains. The path of least resistance leads west, toward the cities, just like it has for a century. And once they leave, the plains lose not just a person, but every dollar that person would have earned, every child they would have raised, every business they might have opened. The talent drains toward the Front Range, just like the water. Stand anywhere on Colorado's eastern plains and spin in a circle. Flat horizon in every direction, center pivot circles, grain elevators, maybe a wind turbine turning slowly in the distance. No mountains, no ski towns, no craft breweries. This is the Colorado that does not make the postcards, but it is the Colorado that fed the mining camps, that grew the wheat, that watered the cattle, that quietly subsidized the state's rise while the state looked the other way. Eastern Colorado did not empty out because nobody wanted it. It emptied out because everything we did to keep it full, the homesteads, the plows, the pumps, the machines, solved one problem and created the next. Each fix worked just long enough to erase the last generation's reason for being there and hand the next generation a crisis they did not build but could not escape. The rain lied, the soil blew away, the water is draining, and the people followed the water, just like they always do. Thanks for watching. If you want to keep exploring how geography shapes where Americans live, check out the videos on screen and subscribe.